March 1956. Kingman, Arizona. A diner on Old Route 66, 9 miles east of the Colorado River crossing, at the foot of the Black Mountains where the highway begins its long climb toward Oatman. The padlock goes on the door at 8 in the morning. The man who puts it there does not look like a villain. That is the first thing anyone who was present would tell you. Later, when they talked about that morning. He wore a wool blazer despite the heat that was already building off the asphalt. His name was Clifton Ware, and he was the loan officer at the Mohave County branch of a savings institution whose name is not worth mentioning now. And he carried the padlock in a paper sack, as though it were a lunch. He snapped it through the hasp, checked it once, and was back in his car before the breakfast crowd from the gas station next door had finished their first cup. Here is the story. The diner had been Dorothy Slade's for 14 years. She had come to Kingman in 1942 with her husband Roy, who had a mechanic's gift and a dream of a shop of his own. Roy opened the garage. Dorothy opened the diner 6 months later in a building next door that the garage's landlord threw into the lease as an afterthought, because it had been empty for 3 years and he didn't want the maintenance of it. She built the counter herself, with Roy's help, on 2 consecutive Sundays, out of reclaimed pine and a piece of formica she had ordered from a catalog. She put in 6 stools and 4 booths, and a pie case that she kept full 6 days a week, because a pie case that wasn't full was a pie case that wasn't trying. Roy died in 1948. A car slipped a jack in the garage, and he was under it. Dorothy was 34 years old, with a son named Thomas, who was 11, and a diner with a note she had been paying at $95 a month and a pie case she filled every morning, because a pie case that wasn't full was not trying, and she did not intend to stop trying. She ran the diner alone for 8 more years. She hired a girl named Betty to help with the morning rush, and a boy named Dennis who washed dishes after school. She kept the pine counter scrub pale. She kept the pie case full. She made the coffee strong enough that the truckers who came off Route 66 in the early mornings started calling it Slade Special, which was not a recipe so much as a decision she had made about what coffee ought to be. The booths were red vinyl, soft from use. The window above the counter faced east, and in the mornings the light came through it and lay across the counter in a long bar that moved toward the pie case as the hours went. The place smelled of coffee and fried butter, and on Tuesday mornings when she baked, of cinnamon and brown sugar that drifted as far as the gas station next door. She had 1 delinquent payment in 14 years. 1. In January of 1953, when a pipe froze and burst under the floor, and the repair cost $340 she did not have. She called the bank and explained. A different loan officer, not Clifton Ware, who came later, put a note in the file and told her to catch it up when she could, which she did in 2 payments by April. Clifton Ware had reviewed that file when he came to the branch in 1954. He had written a note of his own in the margin of the January 1953 entry. The note said, "Delinquent history, flag for monitoring." This is how institutions work when they want to work a certain way, and still call it policy. Have you ever known someone who built something from nothing? Not a grand thing, not a famous thing, just a clean counter and a full pie case and coffee strong enough to matter, and kept it going through every hard year without asking for anything from anyone? Some of you grew up eating pie at a counter like Dorothy Slade's. Some of you know exactly what that kind of place smelled like on a cold morning. The trouble came in the winter of 1955. Route 66 through that stretch was being studied for realignment, and the rumor of it was enough to slow the truck traffic that was Dorothy's steadiest income. 3 months of lighter revenue. She came up $210 short in October. She called the bank and left a message for Clifton Ware. He did not return the call. She made a partial payment in November, $70 short. In December, she made the full payment and the $70 she owed, thinking she had caught it up. Clifton Ware's institution had been accruing late fees on the October shortfall at a rate Dorothy had not known was in her original note, buried in a paragraph on page 4 that described the bank's remedies in the event of any payment irregularity. By January 1956, with the fees added and the calculation run the way Clifton Ware's institution ran calculations, Dorothy Slade was $540 behind on a note she believed she was current on. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning while the cinnamon smell was still in the air. She went to the bank that afternoon. Clifton Ware sat behind a desk that was too large for the office and explained the situation with the patience of a man who had explained it before and expected not to be argued with. He showed her the paragraph on page 4. He ran the calculation again on a notepad and turned it around so she could see the numbers. He said the word acceleration, which was the word in the note for what happened when the bank decided the whole remaining balance was due at once rather than in monthly installments. The remaining balance was $2,140. Dorothy Slade looked at the notepad. She had $180 in the account she ran the diner from. She had $55 in the account she ran the house from. She had a son in his second year at Northern Arizona University studying to be a teacher. She said, "I've paid you every month for 14 years. Clifton Ware said the bank appreciated that. He said it the way a man says a thing he does not mean and does not expect to be called on. She had 60 days. 60 days to produce $2,140 or the bank would exercise its remedies, which was the word the paragraph on page 4 used for the padlock. She tried. She went to every person in Kingman she thought might help her. A cousin in Phoenix wired $200. A regular at the counter named Harold, who had been eating her pie for 9 years, pressed an envelope into her hand after Tuesday breakfast that had $75 in it, and she cried in the back room, and then came out and refilled his coffee because she was not going to cry at the counter. She raised $490 in 60 days. She was $650 short. Clifton Ware arrived on a Monday morning in March with the padlock in a paper sack. The gas station attendant from next door stood at the window of his bay and watched. Betty, who was already inside setting up for the morning rush, came to the door and stood in it without saying anything. Dennis, the dishwasher, was 17 years old, and he stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his jacket pockets. And he watched Clifton Ware check the padlock once and walk back to his car, and he did not say anything because there was nothing to say. Dorothy stood at the far end of the building with her arms crossed and watched Clifton Ware's car pull out of the lot. The whole lot knew what had happened. Nobody had moved. Nobody had said a word. You know how a room goes like that, when the thing that is wrong is plain as sunlight and everybody present has found a reason to be still. Where are you watching from? Drop your state in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. The pickup truck that had been parked at the far end of the lot since 6 that morning was a dark green Ford F-100 with California plates and a bed that had a saddle blanket folded over the side rail. The man who had been drinking his coffee at the window counter. He had come in before Betty unlocked, which meant Dorothy had let him in herself and poured his cup herself, had not moved from his stool when Clifton Ware arrived. He sat through it. He did not turn around while Clifton Ware was talking. He kept his cup in both hands and looked out the east-facing window at the light on the highway. He had come off Route 66 the night before, with a schedule he was already behind on. He had asked Dorothy if she had a booth he could use to make some calls in the morning, and she had said yes, because she said yes to anyone who asked politely. And he had been there since before the sun touched the Black Mountains. He heard Clifton Ware say acceleration. He heard the word Remedies. He heard the number. He watched Dorothy Slade walk back inside after Clifton Ware's car was gone. She came to the counter. She stood behind it, both hands flat on the pine, and she looked at the pie case, which was full, because she had filled it that morning the same as every morning for 14 years, because a pie case that wasn't full was not trying, and Dorothy Slade had not stopped trying. The man said, "How much did he say?" She told him. He put down his coffee cup. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a checkbook, the plain kind, the working kind, not the leather-covered kind, and he opened it on the counter, and he wrote. He tore the check out and set it in front of her. She looked at it. She looked up at him. He said, "The coffee here is the best I've had in 3 states. I come through this road. I intend to keep coming through this road. You'd be doing me a favor staying open." She said, "This is $2,140. He said, "I know what I wrote." She said, "I can't take this." He said, "You can put it toward the note, or you can let them keep the lock. Those are the choices." He picked up his hat from the stool beside him. "You've been running this counter since before the war ended, Mrs. Slade. That's not a debt I'd let a man like Clifton Ware collect." He put on his hat. He left $3 beside the coffee cup, which was 10 cents a cup, because that was the kind of arithmetic that said something without saying it. He went out through the door. The padlock was still in the hasp, and he lifted it off as he left, as though it were simply something left where it did not belong, and he set it on top of the paper sack Clifton Ware had left on the step, and he walked to the green Ford and drove west toward the Colorado River crossing, and was out of sight before Betty had found her voice. Dorothy Slade took the check to the bank the next morning. She did not go to Clifton Ware's window. She went to the branch manager, a man named Garrett, whom she had spoken to exactly once in 14 years. She presented the check and the outstanding balance figure and asked for a receipt marked paid in full, which she received, and which she brought back to the diner and put in the drawer under the register where she kept the things that mattered. She ran the diner for 22 more years. She paid the note off completely in August 1959, 3 years ahead of the original schedule. She sent no announcement. She wrote the final check at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning, sealed the envelope herself, walked it to the bank's deposit slot on a Monday, and went back to open the diner at 5:30 the same as every morning. Thomas finished his degree in 1958, took a teaching post in Flagstaff, came back to Kingman in 1961 with a wife, and used the summers to help his mother with the books, because by then the lunch trade had grown past what Dorothy could manage alone. She hired a second cook in 1963. She put a new pie case in the same year, glass on all 4 sides instead of 3, because the old one's hinges had finally gone, and she decided if she was fixing it, she was doing it right. Betty stayed for 19 years, until her own family moved to Phoenix. Dennis, the dishwasher who had stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his jacket pockets the morning of the padlock, became a short-order cook for Dorothy at 23. And stayed until she closed. Think about what it added up to. Dorothy ran the diner from 1942 to 1978, 36 years. She served Route 66 traffic through the post-war boom, through the highway's slow decline, through 2 decades of the interstate taking the long-haul truckers away and the tourist trade filling some of the gap. When she finally closed, not because the bank took it, but because she was 64 years old and her knees had said enough. The diner had been open for 36 years, had put 1 son through college, had employed 17 people over the course of its run, and had served enough of Clifton Ware's special remedy to the truckers and travelers and regulars of Kingman, Arizona, to make the name Slades mean something on that stretch of road that no padlock and no paragraph on page 4 of any loan document was ever going to take away. The check that morning was $2,140. What it bought was 22 more years of pine counter and full pie case and cinnamon on Tuesday mornings, drifting as far as the gas station next door. On the west wall of the Kingman Diner building, the building is a tax office now, has been for 20 years, there is a framed photograph near the rear corridor. The photograph was there when the tax office moved in, and they left it because nobody knew who to give it back to. It shows the diner counter circa 1960, the pie case full, the east window light on the formica, one coffee cup at the near stool as though someone just stepped away for a moment. Below the photograph, inside the same frame, there is a receipt. The date is March 1956. The amount is $2,140. Paid in full is stamped across it in faded red ink, and below the stamp in the careful handwriting of a woman who signed things as though the signature were a promise. Dorothy L. Slade. The afternoon light comes through the corridor window and falls across the frame for about an hour each day before it moves on down the wall. If you pass through Kingman on Old 66, the building is 2 blocks off the main strip, tan stucco with a brown awning. You will see the photograph through the glass if the light is right. Some of you know the name of someone who did something like this quietly, no announcement, no audience. Just a checkbook and a hat and a door left open for someone who needed it. This story belongs to them too. John Wayne never told anyone, not Dorothy Slade's name, not the number on the check. He was asked once, years later, by a journalist who was writing about something else entirely and got onto the subject of generosity, and he said he did not know what the man was talking about. He changed the subject. He was thorough about it. What is known is what Betty remembered, and what Betty told her daughter, and what that daughter told the woman at the Kingman Historical Society, who wrote it down in a notebook in 1991 and then died before she did anything with it. The notebook is in a box in a storage unit on the east side of town. The receipt is in the frame on the wall. Some things survive because someone kept them. Some things matter more for never having been announced. A diner stayed open for 36 more years. A son finished school. A woman who had been running a clean counter since 1942 went on running it the way she had always run it, not because someone saved her, but because someone cleared enough of the road that she could keep going under her own power, which was the only kind of going she had ever known. That is most of how it ever got out at all. If this story meant something to you, subscribe. There is another one like it every week. And unfortunately, they don't make men like John Wayne anymore.